Okay, well, I'll go ahead and kick things off here. Want to welcome everyone to our webinar today on optimizing opportunities for housing from failing shopping malls. Appreciate you joining us. My name is Mike Centetos. I'm the Policy Director for the National Center for Sustainable Transportation, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. Before we get started, I just want to do a quick introduction. This is part of a webinar series that we sponsor here at the National Center for Sustainable Transportation. NCST is part of the University Transportation Centers program administered by the U.S. Department of Transportation. We're a consortium of 6 universities from around the country focused on advancing environmentally sustainable transportation through cutting-edge research, direct policy engagement, and education of our future leaders. Today's webinar is going to last 1 hour. We're going to have a presentation from Dr. Hilda Blanco of the University of Southern California, and that will be followed by some remarks from 2 guest respondents who have been leading a mall redevelopment planning process in the city of Citrus Heights. We're very excited about hearing more about that. And then we're going to open up the floor to Q&A for the last part of the webinar. So you'll see there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom platform. You can type in your questions there at any time. We'll do our best to answer them. And we will be recording this webinar. And it will be available with closed captioning on our website, along with the slides within a few days of the webinar. So we'll make sure you have the link to that website. With that, let's jump in. We're first going to hear from Dr. Hilda Blanco, who's a Professor Emeritus at the University of Washington's Department of Urban Design and Planning. And she's currently a researcher at the Metrans Transportation Consortium at the University of Southern California. Dr. Blanco, we're thrilled to have you, and I'll leave it to you to take it away.
Thank you, Mike, so much. And also, I'd like to thank the National Center for Sustainable Transportation and Caltrans for providing the funds for the research. So today, I'm going to talk to you about a research project I conducted on optimizing opportunities for housing. As an academic, I really have not been focused on housing, but living in LA and confronting the housing crisis every day, I thought about the issue of malls, failing malls, and how this problem could be turned into an opportunity. Yes, Mike, the next slide. And so first, I'm going to talk to you about the motivation, housing affordability in California in particular, and how important it is to increase the housing supply. I'll talk a little bit about the characteristics of malls and about trends and reasons for the failure of malls, the increasing failure of malls, and then do very brief profiles of several malls. And I'm really very pleased that one of these study malls is going to present their terrific case in much greater depth. And then some, actually, I am going to talk a little bit about sustainability criteria that I developed in the study as well. And then conclude the presentation. Yes, Mike. Okay, so you probably all know about how housing affordability has become such a major problem in California, especially in the LA region. And it definitely is one of the lowest in the nation. Home ownership is one of the lowest rates in the country. And the supply of rental housing is quite incredible. The basic vacancy rates for rentals in LA and in the San Diego metro areas was 2.9 recently, which was the lowest rate among the 75 largest metropolitan areas in the country. And so given the widespread housing crisis in California, this study focused on 4 metropolitan areas in the state, including the greater LA area, San Francisco, San Diego, and Sacramento metropolitan areas. Malls have regional malls, which is where I focused on, and super regional malls have very large footprints from about 40 to 120 acres. And so they present great opportunities. Normally, they have these anchor stores, which are the Macy's, the J.C. Penney's, the Sears, which typically occupy about half of the square footage of the mall. And they serve as attractors for customers to the other shops in the malls. And so they have been very important for shopping malls overall. But as you probably know, there has been a tremendous failure of some of these anchor stores, Macy's and J.C. Penney's and Sears. There have been closures of most of these and bankruptcies. And so that is one of the reasons for the failure of malls. The other thing to remember about malls is that they are rated in the industry in terms of A, B, and C based on the revenues generated by non-anchor stores by square foot. And Class A malls are the best, and then the B and C depending on sales of non-anchor stores. And most malls, over 80%, are rated B and C malls. Yes. Some of the reasons for the failure of malls is that there were just too many constructed since the 1970s. For example, mall space quadrupled between 1970 and 2007, while the US population grew slightly less than 50%. And then, of course, as we all know, there has been increased competition from e-commerce, accelerating since the 2000s. Some malls have undergone or planned redevelopment into lifestyle centers, adding high-income apartment housing, so on. Industry experts, such as Cushman & Wakefield or Credit Suisse, predict that Class A malls will likely survive, but that the others may undergo redevelopment, adding non-retail uses. And experts have been forecasting that the reinvention of dying malls as mixed-use projects will gain momentum in 2019 and beyond. But of course, COVID intervened, so we haven't had much redevelopment since then. Yes. The study aims were the following. First, to identify and profile malls that were undergoing redevelopment to try to figure out their characteristics in the process that they followed, and also to identify vulnerable malls with closed anchor stores that could be good candidates for redevelopment to include housing. And one of the things that I did was to do a rough calculation of the number of housing units that could be included in their redevelopment and compare that to the housing needs in a city. And I used a methodology which provides guidelines for housing units per net or gross density. I basically made some assumptions. I said, let's just use 50% of the acreage and assume that the other 50% goes into open space and roads and anything else. And then what can you do with the other 50% in terms of redevelopment into a mixed use type of project? And my assumption was really not high rise. It was really 5 6-story buildings with commercial on the ground level. And on the basis of that, I calculated the number of housing units that could be generated by such development. And I also used the California's Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And this is a system that you probably all know better than I do, that allocates a certain quota for housing, affordable housing in particular, for local governments every 8 years or so. And then I also developed sustainability criteria to guide the redevelopment of failing malls. And we'll talk a bit more about that, yes. So here I'm just going to briefly talk about four malls that we profiled. We profiled about 12 altogether. And the first one is the Parkway Plaza, which has no current plans, but city has rezoned the area to mixed use, which facilitates redevelopment with housing. And another a Bay Area mall, Southland Mall, which is a struggling mall that has no current plans. And then the very infamous Blanco Mall, which probably you all know about. It has gotten a lot of press, where the owner tried to redevelop with housing, but a lot more office space. And the city fought the owner. And so there's an issue of, is this really a NIMBY case or not? And then, of course, the Sacramento area mall, the city of Citrus Heights Sunrise Mall, where the city has initiated the redevelopment with housing. We're going to hear, we're very fortunate that we're going to hear a lot more about this. Okay, next. So first, let me tell you a little bit about Parkway Plaza in El Cajon, and here's the footprint. Next, please. And one of the interesting things about doing these case studies is the ownership patterns. And there are quite a number of malls that are owned by certain retail partners. And I think perhaps for the next research, I'll look into this, because I think there are opportunities to work with some of these mall owners. So the zoning is important. What is, surrounding the area, when it was open, how old is this mall, how large this mall is. I'm always very fascinated by how much of the mall is taken up by parking. And this mall recently was home to 9 anchors, Best Buy, Dick's Sporting Goods. Some of these are still there, but others may not be. Office Depot, so on. The Sears closed in 2018. Forever 21 was scheduled to close by the end of 2019. And there were likely closures of JCPenney's and Macy's. But the city in 2013 adopted an updated housing element to accommodate 5,805 residential units that had been allocated to it for housing growth. And it decided to apply a mixed-use overlay zone to properties within 4 areas of the city, including the area where Parkway Plaza is located. And so it has the opportunity, because of this rezone, to redevelop this mall. Yes, the next one. This is the Southland Mall in the Bay Area. Next, please. Brookfield Properties, which owns quite a number of malls in California. Here we've got a central business district zoning, and surrounding zoning is single-family residential, as you can see. An old mall opened in 1964, 82 acres, 70% occupied by parking. And again, the anchor store Sears, JCPenney's, and Macy's. And it's been a struggling mall, according to the local press. But as of 2019, there were no plans for redevelopment. Next. And here is the Blanco Mall. I'm not quite sure whether I can tell you the whole story about this, but this is, go on, please. In Cupertino, California, the owner, Sandhill Properties, not a national mall owner company. And it's an old mall, 1976 it was open. It's not as large as some of the other ones we studied, 58-acre plot and 34 acres occupied by parking. And it lost its anchors in 2015. And Sandhill, the owner, tried to secure agreement for mixed-use center with 800 housing units, but 2 million square feet of office space. And then this proposal was the subject of competing ballot measures in 2016. And it actually organized quite a number of the community members into a Friends for Better Cupertino. Basically was organized against this development. And however, in 2017, California passed SB 35 that basically focused on cities that do not meet the regional housing needs assessment goals. And it mandates cities to provide streamlined ministerial review of qualifying infill housing projects. And so after the bill was passed, the developer, the owner developer, changed the project to include a lot more housing units, 50% affordable, and it went down a little bit on its office space. And somehow or another, the city manager approved SB 35. But the city council, the next one, with new members by 2019, including some members that were active in the Friends for a Better Cupertino, they passed a general plan amendment eliminating all office space allowances and restricting the Valco development. However, the California's Department of Housing and Community Development threatened to sue the city if housing was not built. This happened in August of 2019. And so at that point, Sandhill, the developer, sued the city for help for their stop at nothing approach to preventing the project in September of 2019. And in May of 2020, the judge hearing the case decided in favor of Sandhill to allow the project to proceed. And demolition began as COVID developed and is still in process. And I don't think I could do that story justice in just a couple of minutes. Next, please. Okay, so this is the mall that you're going to hear a lot about in just a few minutes. This is the Sunrise Mall, Citrus Heights in the Sacramento region. Next, please. Here is a mall that has multiple owners, so it was more difficult to work on, but you'll hear a lot more about this. And then the zoning. It's an old mall, open in 1970, 96-acre plot, large mall, and a lot of it occupied by parking and circling mall. But I mean, what is so impressive about this case is that the city has taken a very active approach in redeveloping this mall. And it began a process through a specific plan, extensive community outreach that you'll hear a lot of the details about. And finally, just this November, the city approved a redevelopment plan to transform Sunrise Mall. Next, please. So one of the things that I did in this project was develop sustainability criteria for redevelopment. And we did a literature search and all that and came up with these criteria. And so the first, I think, criterion is social sustainability in the case of the redevelopment of malls. And the housing, given that California has this tremendous housing deficit, is extremely important as a social sustainability criterion to how much housing can this development support. And the second social sustainability criteria is really community involvement. And this is something that the Valco case, I think, makes clear. Definitely there was a lot of community involvement, but after the fact, and not and the community process was not really working with the owners from the very beginning. And so in order to do, at least I believe, in order to do a good redevelopment of these failing malls, you have to have early and deep community involvement. The second criterion has to do with economic issues. And here we have to focus on the impact of local costs and revenues. And of course, it's a real issue, but cities could do fiscal impact analysis. They could do impact fees if necessary, and so on. And the study talks a bit more about that. And then there is the environmental sustainability issues. And the fact is that these malls, for the most part, are located adjacent to major highways. And so they have tremendous air pollution problems. And there are several things that can be done to protect a new housing population in these locations. And part of that, I think, is on the siting of where the housing would be located. And also, of course, tree planting, landscaping, and so on. Also, I was encouraged to find that the state has upgraded its HVAC, heating and ventilation and requirements and so on. I think it was in 2019 or so that they're much better. And I think that if you have new buildings that meet those codes, and if you have frequent inspections, at least every 2 years or so, of those buildings to ensure that indoor air pollution is minimized, then I think those places could be fine for housing. Climate change, I didn't really go too much into it, but just noted that California has been a leader in the country in terms of developing all kinds of regulations that will ensure that new development in these failing malls will do the most they can to reduce climate impacts. Next, please. Oh, I forgot. All right. So basically, I said all of this.
Hilda, did you maybe just want to touch on this point about the amount of, or the
oh yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I forgot about that. So the analysis of several of the mall studies indicated that if 1/3 of the housing units in such redevelopments are affordable, redeveloped malls could provide from 20 to 54% of the city's affordable housing targets for an 8-year cycle. And that's pretty substantial. Yes. Thank you, Mike, for pointing that out. Okay, I think I kind of covered this. Yes, redevelopment will affect property tax and sales tax revenues and the costs of providing urban services to new residents. And it will require analyses and potentially new impact fees. For new residents in a mixed-use development, definitely it could have an economic impact as well, in that it would increase the potential for walking and biking for shopping needs within the development and reduce transportation costs. Next, please. One of the things that I found in this study is that some of the malls that already had redevelopment plans try not to do environmental impact reports or try to rely, actually, they try to rely on existing environmental impact reports from the time when the shopping mall was actually developed, in some cases going back to the 1980s or so. But I mean, it's understandable. EIRs are costly and so on. But there are real environmental issues when it comes to incorporating housing into these locations because they are adjacent to major highways with very high pollution levels. And then the final but very important point is that new residents will likely have different transit needs than are currently available at the sites. And so studies of additional or new transit options should be conducted to reduce automobile use, especially on adjacent highways. But very likely, those studies should be done after or as people are moving in, because it is not clear what new transit needs will be for the new residents. One of the issues that, of course, I think any redevelopment will confront is the fact that some owners, yes, are interested in housing, but typically they are interested in higher income housing. And so I think what will be important for communities that are considering such redevelopment with some affordable housing is that it shouldn't all be affordable housing, that there should be a mix of incomes. And this is very important for communities to address early on and to have the community involved from early on to figure out what is a mix that will be compatible with what the population would support. And the issue of NIMBYism that is likely to happen. And so being proactive in engaging the public in the planning process is extremely important to avoid NIMBYism. Yes, next, please. COVID, as we know, is likely to increase, is already increasing the closure of malls. And so there are greater opportunities for redevelopment. On the other hand, I think that timing is really very important because COVID has increased competition from another increasing use during the pandemic for failing malls, and that is warehousing. And so communities will need to, I think, move relatively quickly to ensure that they can benefit from the failure of malls by incorporating housing as we emerge from COVID. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks so much, Hilda. Really good kind of overall framework, I think, and helping us kind of think about some of the opportunities, but also some of the barriers and challenges presented by these developments that are in so many communities around the state. So now so lots of good questions coming in. Please keep those coming. I think some of those may be addressed in our next session here. So I want to introduce our two guest respondents who we're thrilled to have with us today to talk a little bit more about that last case study that Dr. Blanco mentioned in her research. So we have two leaders from the city of Citrus Heights who have been involved with redevelopment efforts at the Sunrise Mall site. We're going to hear about their experiences with planning and outreach. So first we'll hear from Casey Kempenaar, who's the Community Development Director for the city of Citrus Heights, and then Megan Huber, who is the Economic Development and Communications Manager for the city of Citrus Heights. So Casey, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Pleasure to be here. My screen is showing. Is that you all see? Okay, great. So just want to give a little bit of context. Citrus Heights is a suburb of Sacramento, so we're located northeast off I-80. You can see here where we are in relation to the region. We're adjacent to Roseville, west of Folsom, and you can see. Is my screen not changing, or is it changing? Okay. Sorry about that. Can you see the regional map now? Okay, great. So we are located adjacent to Roseville, west of Folsom. The Sunrise Mall is located in the southeast corner of the city. You can see here, it's part of our Sunrise Marketplace, and this is the context in that marketplace. So we had a lot of challenges to surmount with this mall. It's been a very important economic component of the city since we've incorporated. But since we incorporated, there's been a number of challenges, the retail apocalypse, the Amazon effect. The mall has seen a couple of attempts for redevelopment in the past, and for a variety of reasons did not go anywhere. There are multiple owners. It's a 100-acre sandbox, and getting them up to speed and playing nice in that sandbox was part of the challenge. Education and helping them understand CEQA and the sandbox that we have to play in. Having to pay for the specific plan, it was over $1 million of city investment to come up to prepare the specific plan. So that was an obstacle. We had to cobble together money. Nostalgia was another component, and Megan will talk a little bit about this. There's just a very nostalgic remembrance of when the mall was in its heyday, and it was the place to be in Sacramento County, in the region. And then COVID, of course, is the wild card that we're all grappling with. Let's talk a little bit about context, and then Megan will kind of talk about how we surmounted these. So as you can see here, Sacramento County, or the mall was built in Sacramento County in about 1970. It had a couple decades of really good economic capacity, and has slowly trailed down over the last couple decades. In 2018, the mall was purchased, and there are, as I said, 4 or 5 owners at that time, and the bulk of the mall, the inline shops, was purchased by a group called Namdar out of the New York area.
Hey, Casey, the slides aren't advancing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better? Yes. Okay.
Yep, you're good.
So you could see here, Sacramento, this is in the B, Sacramento's new mall, what's in store. And at that time, there was a couple things in store, and the city did not think that they were going to help achieve our economic development goals. In particular, the owner wanted to carve out a couple pads and put a gas station and a couple of drive-throughs there. And we know, and as Dr. Blanco described, these are the key to housing and economic development goals. So we needed to protect that land and do a thoughtful planning process to make sure we are achieving that highest and best use, and maximizing the development potential, and also tax revenues and community involvement throughout that process. So initially we considered a moratorium, and for a variety of reasons, we did not go down that route. But we did end up adopting a general plan amendment, and that general plan amendment basically said, you can see here on the right of the screen, no further development can occur until there's a specific plan in place to make sure it's done in a holistic manner, and looking at an effective concentration of uses that work together, making sure it's designed for people, not cars, and architecturally it fits within the community. So we hired a consultant. Was led by Gensler with a number of sub-consultants, and then we started to prepare the specific plan. It's a little bit more context. You can see here, here's the map of the 100-acre or so site. You can see Namdar owns about 2/3 of the site. Seritage is a REIT that owns the former Sears site. And then, of course, JCPenney's is involved as well. The 2 smaller pieces on the corners are smaller development groups that are a little bit less engaged, but we can talk more about that in a moment. So it's about 1.4 million square feet, and about of the 100 acres, about 75 acres is parking spaces. So you can see getting these folks to play in the sandbox nicely was part of the challenge, and getting them up to speed. You could see they all have different levels of experience and different, boards of directors and issues going on, whether it's bankruptcies or new to the area. So we navigated that as we educated the owners and brought them along with us on the journey of the specific plan. So again, they're beyond just the ownership group. We have neighbors exactly adjacent to the site. We have our broader community. And really, Megan will talk about this a little bit later. The community includes beyond sister sites. This was such a regional destination for such a long time. We were hearing from people all over the region who had feedback about what the mall should be or what their thoughts were on the history. Just a little kind of illustrating the downward slide. You could see, this is the whole marketplace was generating about $4.5 million worth of sales tax annually. And then, Amazon effect was starting about then. We had competing neighbors with the Roseville Galleria. So started to see that drop off, and it continues to drop off in the Great Recession. And then we had another competing mall. So the competition, changing in e-commerce, those things all have led to the decline in revenues coming from the mall. So I think most of you know what a specific plan is. Basically, it's a plan that sets the rules and guidelines for development. We have been proactive in this plan. Sometimes it's developer driven, but in this case, the city was the driver of the plan. And we wanted to make sure flexibility was well incorporated into the plan from a CEQA perspective and from an administrative perspective, making sure, because it's such a big site, because it's such a big endeavor, that we had flexibility to adjust over time, given the legal constraints that are tied to that. So the 5 big ideas that kind of guided the plan development were helped developed by the community through our engagement process that Megan will touch on. So these are the 5 big ideas that you'll see recurring throughout the plan: restoring as a community and regional destination, establishing a green network. If you saw the aerial photo, it was almost all paving, not a lot of green. Not really designed for people in the past, but really making an emphasis on walkability and connections to adjacent land uses. Introducing livable neighborhoods where folks can live on the site, and becoming an economic engine again for the city, making it profitable, sustainable fiscally. So those were important tools. So as you can see here, this shows pretty much it was only retail, about 1.1 million square feet of retail currently. And we are introducing through a specific plan up to 2,200 units of residential, nearly 1 million square feet of office, hotel rooms, community institutional, and then a much smaller retail footprint, which is largely focused on restaurants and experiential retail. This is the site plan. This is a conceptual site plan. This is just an artist's representation of how the plan could be developed. Given the flexibility that's built into the plan, it may not look like this. And so that's been part of our outreach is tailoring expectations that this is one way it could develop. But since it's likely to develop over 20 years, it could change as we go through the process. So you can see here, it's anchored by a main street that would replace the mall ultimately. And we didn't touch on this too much in this presentation, but there is phasing where we would focus on the periphery of the site first and increase residents that live there, which make the commercial part and office part more palatable and more feasible. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Megan, who will talk about how we got consensus in the sandbox and the outreach that we did.
Thanks, Casey. Good morning, everyone. Just a little context. So, my perspective, I oversee both economic development and communications for the city, which turns out to be a competitive advantage for this project because it needed a huge volume of both to be successful in engagement. So taking a look at what our goals were from the outset of this project, in fact, even prior, We made sure that we were ready to go with engagement on day one. Our goals were to absolutely maximize community engagement as well as owner engagement, another very important component, to create consensus for the eventual vision and future project review. We had a goal to bring local, regional, and national visibility to the project, and ultimately work to attract potential users and developers to the site. So I'm gonna walk you through exactly what that has looked like for the past 2 years. One of the unique things we did with this project that you don't see in other specific plans is take the opportunity to brand it. Our city in particular is 98% built out and has practically no opportunity for new development that can diversify our local economy, add new rooftops and opportunities for community members. So what Sunrise Mall redevelopment means to us is a way that we can work smarter to be able to achieve those goals, which means it's practically a singular goal for us from an economic development as well as a city perspective. So to put weight behind that, increase awareness and visibility, we took the opportunity to brand it. You can see that the brand here takes advantage of the nostalgia that Casey had mentioned, what the mall has meant to folks, and the name we coined itself, Sunrise Tomorrow, invokes that we're going to give the site a new tomorrow. So we pulled this brand through on all of our engagement and communications, and I'll show you a little bit more about what that looks like. This is just a snapshot to show you the high rate of frequency that we deployed messaging on all of our communications channels. And the message that I really want to drive home here is it doesn't happen in a few big steps. It happens by laying out a drip system to consistently and frequently and effectively deliver that message to your community so that by the time you do have a big message or a milestone, everyone already knows about it and is really excited about it as well. We used a variety of communications channels to reach these audiences for community engagement. We created a standalone project website, which I'll do a little bit deeper a dive on here in the next couple slides. Frequently utilized Facebook and Nextdoor. We used our own local online and print media. We're a suburb of about 88,000 people and are a little unique in that we have about 3 different local papers that cover our community. So definitely took advantage of that as a not noisy way to reach our folks. And we also programmed events and direct promotion. Because we are a small, scrappy team in Citrus Heights, we had a creed of creating material once and using everywhere. That thumbnail featuring testimonials, that was a product that we actually designed to take advantage of sessions where we gathered stakeholders to get their feedback. These are industry experts, regional leaders, government agencies, neighborhoods. When we gathered these stakeholders to get feedback to inform the plan, we also took the opportunity to create sharing products like testimonial videos and similar. So we're not just doing the act, we can share the doing of the act as well, which certainly aids with engagement. We also utilize communications channels to reach our regional community, including Google Ads for the project website, talk radio, TV and news, LinkedIn using targeted ads to the development, retail, office community, as well as business and professional journals. So I wanted to take a moment to walk you through a high-level scope of our project website, because it really is a one-stop shop in all the different aspects that we need to honor for quality community engagement. First and foremost, once the feedback had been incorporated into a scope that informed the specific plan, we made an interactive illustrative diagram available to our community so that they can explore at their leisure, see all of the different components that were going to make up the specific plan and eventual development, and really get excited about the future to come. Important note here for folks who might do their own communicating about specific plans in the future. we were really careful to educate our community on what an illustrative diagram is. Casey alluded to this earlier. We wanted to make sure folks know that, this is not an eventual promise that the site will actualize in exactly this manner. It's a representation of how the development allowances can fit on the site for eventual project scoping. So definitely underscore that methodology to manage expectations in community engagement. Back up one case, not quite done yet. The site also included a Pinterest-style idea wall where folks could share their own ideas of what they'd like to see on the site. And it had a section to review project history, and it allowed folks to also leave their own memories of the mall. Casey mentioned that our mall has been a regional institution for so long, which means 90% of our surplus population has their own personal connection to the mall. And there, it's a little bit of internal conflict where folks are excited about the future, but also sad that it no longer is what it once meant to our community. So the project history and memory wall gave folks a chance to honor that before we move forward. And finally, there was a section that reviewed other mall demalling redevelopment success stories. So folks know that this is possible and not just a dream. Okay, Case. A final mechanism to ensure maximum community engagement, we hosted a series of community workshops, of which thumbnails are on screen here. The first workshop was held a couple months after the inception of the specific plan and onboarding of consultants to roll out education on the specific plan process and really gather community feedback. The snapshots that you see here are idea boards where folks were provided with different images that represented different uses that could go on the site, including different housing typologies, office and employment campus vibes, retail and entertainment concepts, and they were able to essentially design their own illustrative plan and get excited about how the puzzle pieces will eventually be put together there. That workshop had over 300 attendees, which was a record for our community. The second workshop was held once the specific plan had been scoped out prior to embarking on all of the paperwork, and that was to provide a progress report for our community and continue to build consensus. And then finally, once the draft specific plan was complete and released, we hosted a third community workshop to present that co-created plan that we co-authored with our community to answer any final questions, hear any concerns, and continue to provide information so folks can stay excited about it. And what that really resulted in is a community vision, which is exciting. No one wants to get to the end of a specific plan road and bump up against community dissent. It's important to have regular check-ins every step of the way so that you do have a photo collage like this that shows the depth and breadth of community that was involved. So what that really results in when you combine economic development and communications as strategy to execute a specific plan is engagement as marketing. You can see by the metrics here on screen that the community engagement created a depth and breadth of reach that would not be achieved otherwise. And this project overall has generated over 12 million impressions to date. And while that is impressive, really the most important part is there are tangible results of this marketing. You can go forward, Casey. There are tangible results of this marketing and engagement. This is now a nationally recognized case study on mall revitalization. The activity has raised the visibility of the site in owner portfolios, so it cannot be ignored. The media has generated significant developer leads, which is essential target marketing, and it resulted in a unanimously approved specific plan and EIR in November. So we're well on our way to transforming from that before shot to hopefully the after. So that brings us to the end of our deck. And Mike, I did flag a couple of questions to answer live. Would you mind if I just get started on those?
Absolutely, yeah. I was hoping you could start with the one about the role that the regional governments play in this process. This seems like very much a locally driven effort on your all's part, but I'd be interested to hear about whether SACOG was involved in some way or just generally how NPOs maybe could support these types of efforts.
Yes, absolutely. Great and very important question. First and foremost, we consider those regional government organizations essential stakeholders in this process. So they were also involved since day one in stakeholder interviews and providing feedback to be able to inform the specific plan. And they're also walking alongside us on the eventual implementation and redevelopment. So Casey has alluded to folks before that really the approval of the specific plan is the easy part. And now it's the pull through of the development where the rubber hits the road. And we need partners to be able to make that happen. From a coordination perspective, from a subject matter expertise perspective, from a funding exploration perspective, there's a lot to be done, and those stakeholders are a very important part. Casey, did you have anything to add to that question?
No, but I think there's another question that came in that kind of ties into that, and they asked about educating the owners on specific plans and bringing them along. How was this done? Any hesitations from the owners? What were the lessons learned?
Okay, I'll get started on that one. Owner engagement is a huge component to this, and it was another guiding principle for us. Because many of our property owners are not developers, they are property managers and tenant attractors, right? As mall owners. We had to start from the literal starting line to educate on what a specific plan is, how it works, what it means, and also make sure they know the value. The fact that a specific plan allows the densification and the diversification of the site incentivizes development. So it's walking them through that life cycle to be able to understand the value at the end, that we're redirecting focus from short-term to long-term future, how that's going to work, and our commitment, number one, to lead with pragmatism and flexibility, but number two, not just be plan administrators, be partners in facilitating that redevelopment. We're key relationship builders to be able to keep folks around the table.
Yeah, and I would add, we worked to introduce them to folks that are in the development community to make sure they understood. In California, CEQA is a gorilla, and those developers outside the state don't understand it and do not understand the benefit of having a EIR to eliminate risk. But we brought them together with those that understand CEQA, understand California land development. They were able to help explain how important that is and to eliminate that risk side of things. So that was definitely part of the education, is telling them what this means in their terms. So that was an important part of it as well.
Yeah, and Casey, I see another related question. Nicholas asks, generally, do existing mall structures have reuse value in redevelopment scenarios, or are the sites mostly scraped? And I want to take a minute just to drive home the phasing point that Casey reviewed earlier in the conversation. The makeup of our mall is a competitive advantage when we talk about redevelopment, because in the total of 100 acres, 75 acres is surplus parking. Only 25 has building footprint on it, which means we get to add a whole lot before we ever have to modify anything. And that's an important part, important message in our community engagement as well. How we combat that nostalgia, combat folks, the minority of folks who are still shopping at our mall and don't want it to close down. Our message is, the mall can stay open however long it wants. The specific plan does not affect its operation. What the specific plan does is allow the activation of surplus parking lot to be able to begin this redevelopment. And if/when the mall is no longer viable, of which is, projected to be in our lifetimes because retail apocalypse, the specific plan is there as a soft landing and effective tool to be able to create its next chapter rather than have it continue to atrophy. So phasing absolutely one of the most important parts to stay flexible, ensure pragmatism, ensure market viability as well. Because when you talk about scraping a site, there are risks to carrying that cost, from a land holding cost, from a demolition cost, from a time it takes to reactivate development after you scrape it. It makes the plan unviable because developers cannot make that financially work, which is another reason why phasing is so important. So we don't count out the mall building at all, and it's still a game piece on this chessboard for sure.
I think it's important to note there are probably case studies that do have mall reuse, and there are some swing space opportunities there. However, if you look at those opportunities, they're largely focused on distribution centers, and given the other economic development goals and quality of life goals that we had, those weren't really a good fit and financially didn't pencil to make it happen here in Citrus Heights. But there probably are other case studies elsewhere in the country that may be applicable to that.
Yeah, a great point to underscore that these case studies are all so unique because the factors vary so widely.
I want to squeeze in maybe one last question on economic sustainability, which Hilda was one of the indicators that you had talked about in your presentation, and you outlined kind of considering, economic benefits or impacts to mall owners, to local governments, to potential new residents. But there's a couple interesting questions here about workers at malls or businesses at malls, and this dynamic of, as malls kind of decline and rents go down, and there's kind of new opportunities for businesses that maybe wouldn't be able to pay higher rents at a different location, and how that opportunity may be lost. So Megan, that was another question you had flagged in terms of kind of how that dynamic plays out and kind of whether you're seeing Citrus Heights. And kind of like all of your thoughts on that before we close here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question. When we think about the businesses that are in operation of the mall today, reference earlier conversation in that so much stuff can be added before the mall ever has to be modified, right? Which means the mall can exist as long as those businesses are able to exist within it. And there is still potential by adding 24/7 population to the site and additional foot traffic, that those businesses have opportunity to prosper into the future. Past that, in terms of net new jobs, there will be many. One of the other really important tools that inform this specific plan is a market analysis. We wanted to make sure we were creating a market-driven and proof-pointed plan to ensure eventual execution. And the market analysis proof pointed that the current mixed use development, as noted in the development allowances, is able to pencil, really, pro forma pencils for this project. And at build out, it is worth over $1 billion in economic impact and will create thousands of new jobs in a variety of use types that correspond with those different land uses as well. We have a target to add an employment campus along with retail and entertainment and neighborhood services. So still a great mix and variety of jobs that gives Citrus Heights a chance to diversify its local economy. Case, anything to add on that one?
Oops. No, I did see a question about the impact to taxes and revenue generated by the project, and the market analysis identified about 100 million of revenue over 20 years after build out. So it was definitely a revenue positive for the city, which is part of what our big idea is making it fiscally sustainable to support the city.
Great question.
Yeah, all great questions, and I apologize. There were others that we're not able to get to because we're bumping up on time here. But I did really want to thank all of you, Dr. Blanco, for sharing your research with us, and Megan and Casey for sharing your great experience with us for the Sunrise Tomorrow, and really excited to see how that plays out in the coming decades in our region here. And of course, thanks to all of you for attending our webinar. We will have a survey that you'll be sent following the webinar. We'd love to get your feedback, and keep an eye out for our next webinar, probably in the new year. So thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.